life delivers all these opportunities, i.e. stress or trauma, for us to learn from, or lose our health over.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Recovery Project. Today we have Steve Gurney, a household name many of you will know. Steve has won the Coast to Coast race 9 times. You probably also know that he nearly died after about the second race, had a terrible illness and came back from that. What you may not know is that he's had another major illness pattern in recent years. So we're going to hear it all today. We're going to hear about his various illnesses and amazing recoveries, but more importantly, what did he learn from it? That's what Richie and I care about the most, isn't it? What do people learn that they take from their journey?
Well, I'm super excited to have Steve on, obviously from an athlete's point of view, but also there's always a story behind the person, and I'm utterly intrigued and curious to understand the challenges, but the learnings that we get from it. So, let's rip in. Pleasure to have you, Steve.
So I've actually been reading your book, Steve. I've got it right here. I would recommend this to anyone who's a bit curious. It is not only enormously entertaining, but fascinating hearing about the world of adventure racing. And the question that I got left with is, why adventure racing? Because it sounds freaking crazy. So what draws you to that, and what were you feeding in yourself by doing it?
Wow, that's a deep question. And it'll take a few hours to explain all of my answer. But let me start by saying I was drawn to it in a conscious way because it seemed exciting. You know, adventure requires, well, let's look at the definition of adventure, because that's what appealed to me. Definition, if you look it up in the dictionary, is something like a risky undertaking with outcome unknown. digging deeper into it, you require a MacGyverness about you, like skills to whitewater kayak and climb mountains, and that's super satisfying to gain those skills. Plus, the idea of being resilient and being able to problem solve on the go, and your life might even depend on it. It had that sort of Boy Scoutness about it to it. Or, put another way, if my plane crashed in the mountains, I'm likely to be able to survive because of the skills and the attitude and the risk management that you might apply to getting out of there. So that's what initially drew me to adventure sport, and the cool people. There's, it's a real salt of the earth types. There's not a lot of pretentiousness in those sorts of sports because you're just going and going and going, the endurance nature of it. But I've learned subsequent to that, decades later, that there was probably something else that was drawing me to adventure sport. And it wasn't until I'd had a whole lot of stuff go wrong in my life, major stuff that you've hinted at already, Mel, that I started to learn, why I was unconsciously drawn to wanting or the need to win at adventure sport. Not so much the sport itself, but the need to be hugely successful, in fact, dominate. And Richie will understand a bit of that probably too as a sports person. It's going to be a great conversation, isn't it?
Mate. So then the driver. So what was driving you to push you to do the things that you did? And to be brutally honest, the 9 times coast to coast was ridiculous. And obviously there's a myriad of other achievements that you have. But what was driving you? What was underlying and underpinning what you wanted to prove?
Yeah, good question. I actually don't know the full answer yet. And
got to run a few more races first.
Well, I'm probably a bit old and broken now to win races, but there's other stuff. And I like that word yet, and that's one of my messages, I guess, is from the learnings I've got over my lifespan so far, is that to put that yet word on means that it's a presupposition that there's still more to learn, that I'm open to learning and I'm curious about it. So I still want to learn more about what drove me. But what I've learned so far, Richie, is that the drive to win in that sort of sport was probably I was trying to prove something.
Nice.
Both to myself and to others. And that's all to do with childhood, and I've done lots and lots of study and courses and reading and navel gazing. And to cut straight to the point here, I guess that what I've learned so far is that we all as kids have stuff happen to us that at the time as a youngster seems traumatic, and when we look back on it, we laugh and think, well, man, I was upset by that. Wow, man, I know so much more now why I was upset. But at the time, as a little 5-year-old, we didn't really know how the world really works. And just one comment that someone makes to me, or a look someone gives, or some kid beating me up, that's hugely traumatic. And you make yourself a promise that you're not going to let that happen again. And that starts with personality. And that makes me an individual, makes you an individual, and someone else different again. And that's part of why I wanted to win those races, to prove to someone, and probably those kids that beat me up, and to my parents who didn't love me anymore, supposedly, but I had to prove that I was lovable and I was capable and I was worth loving. And I think that's a pretty common theme amongst every human, if we're prepared to admit it at some level, And I had a brilliant love. I mean, my parents loved me, and I had a brilliant upbringing, really. But I look back on my childhood and think, oh man, that was it wasn't a very nice childhood. But it was, as an adult looking back on it. And I'm being a bit oversensitive here, but there's no right or wrong about it. It's just, that's what is, and that's how I end up being this driven athlete that had to prove himself and win races. And all I can do now is share my story so that others may learn from that if they're in the same sort of boat.
Okay, we segue into clearly the oxygen of life is love, right? And everyone craves for love, acceptance from their parents, to be validated, to be valued as a person. So you go through life. At what age were you when you had what was it, from 5 to what did you decide that your parents didn't love you, or there was some sort of a perceptive view on that?
Yeah, well, I think from the study and the courses and the reading I've done, and from me then reevaluating my life, I don't think it was necessarily 5. I think it starts from year dot, really. Yeah. And I'll just tell you a little nutshell of my story so that it kind of puts it in context. I was the firstborn child, and it's well documented that firstborns, when there are siblings involved, in the next few years, they end up being competitive usually, they're perfectionists and A-type personalities. And there's nothing wrong or right about it. It's just how it is. Get used to it. But I didn't get used to it for a while. So, and I'm sure there's a lot of people listening, and maybe you two as well can identify with that. Maybe Richie, you as an athlete. So when my sister was born at, 2 years after me, all that love and attention I'd had from my grandparents and my parents suddenly disappeared. And I thought, whoa, what's wrong here? I'm not getting those cuddles and kisses and stuff that I used to get. So that's my first inkling at 2 years old that, I need to compete for that love, and something wrong with me because now they're loving that person over there, not me anymore. She was the invader in the nest, was my sister. And then at 5 years old, my parents decided to take my sister and I to live in a foster home with 17 other orphans. And that was, as a 5-year-old, hugely traumatic, because now not only did I have to stand in the queue for love with my sister, but 17 other really needy orphans. And so my poor little 5-year-old brain got really upset. And there's a whole lot of stuff happened at that orphanage that where I got abandoned, and the other kids hated me and stuff like that because I had parents. I could go on about the stories, but the nuts and bolts is that it reinforced that thing I learned as 2, that I needed to compete to get love. Now I need to compete even harder as a 5-year-old. And then another thing happened at school. One of the teachers wasn't particularly nice to me, and I learned as a 9-year-old that you have to compete again. So it reinforced that belief, that neural pathway, that way of being, that I had to compete for stuff in life, and especially love. And so that's does that answer your question?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's clear.
There's nothing wrong or right about it. It's just how life is.
Yeah.
And how lucky are we to be living in New Zealand? And I was brought up by Christian parents, and, I had a loving upbringing. It wasn't, we weren't rich or anything, but we were fine. But I've interpreted that life as something wrong. And I think we all do that.
Absolutely.
So when you then did win your first couple of coast to coast, what feeling did that give you, and how long did it last?
Nice question. So I felt elated. I'm not a natural athlete. I had to work really hard. It took me 5 attempts to win the coast to coast, and a lot of failure in there, what I perceived as failure, but failure is actually feedback. But anyway, so it helped me win. The failure helped me win. So when I won my first coast to coast, I remember the elation. I get goosebumps thinking about it now.
Wow, that's cool.
Now. It was only a few months, and I thought, it felt good for a while, but okay, I have to win 2 races to finally get there. And, that repeated until at my 9th one, it was satisfying, but it was even more short-lived. And then I had to retire from racing with injury, and that left me with a really disappointed taste in my mouth that I never received that or achieved the 10 wins.
Because somehow the 10th would have been different, wouldn't it, Steve?
Right, nice round number.
9 wins, it's not enough, but 10, it would have been happiness for life.
Yeah, and that's where I got super depressed for 2 years, suicidal depression. I had to get a lot of help. And that's one of my advice to people is get help. It's there. People just want to help people, and it's there for the taking. You just have to find, you have to be courageous enough to ask for help from the right people. Or anyone, actually. It doesn't have to be the right people, but one of the bits of help I got introduced to works of Eckhart Tolle, who's, The Power of Now, Stillness Speaks, all those. He's written several books about, in essence, there's kind of 3 things are his main principles, but one of them really spoke to me, and that was that we as humans tend to live in the future, where we're always thinking, right, once I get that, my 10 wins or my holiday house or the trophy partner, wife, whatever, then I'll be happy.
Yeah.
And that by definition means we're not happy right at the moment. And
that's right.
There's a lot of disease and depression in our mental space. So that was one of the biggest learnings. And it's a really hard one to keep practicing. And I still haven't learned to do it 100%, but the knowledge that is there is really helpful. So
I actually bookmarked a piece in your book about depression, which I found quite intriguing. Can I just share this with you? It's from your chapter 13, Dark Night of the Soul. And it says, I had to remind myself constantly that a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. There's a bloke who got a world record for eating a plane. Yes, a real plane.
Yeah, what?
It's not a goal I'd be inclined to set, and initially it would seem an insurmountable task, but if I did decide to eat a plane, I'd first dismantle it into separate parts, then I'd chop each part into pieces, then smaller pieces, and then grind them into filings and sprinkle them on my meals like salt and pepper. So to find a way out of depression, I'd start with a few filings, like finding strategies to help me. And that chapter, there were so many wonderful nuggets of gold of all the little filings that you sprinkled into your life that could help resolve depression. And I thought it'd be great if you could share a few of, you've just shared one already, but can you share a few of the things that you did that helped you out of that depression?
Yeah, there's a whole heap of them, as you say in the book. But one I think was really useful was the fake it till you make it thing. So let me actually precede that by another one, which is related. I mean, I've met Steve Irwin, crikey, crocodile man, Steve Irwin. And one of the things I learned from that and my NLP course was that physiology leads psychology.
Yeah,
so if you want to do depression, you wouldn't be standing up, you'd be lying down and you hunch your shoulders and you wouldn't breathe deeply and you're talking a voice like this and you're supposed to be down and you talk to people in a depressed sort of a way. And that's how you get your psychology, and your mind soon follows with depression. But if you act like Steve Irwin and wake up each morning at 5 o'clock or whatever time you get up and think, right, how can I make today a great day? And you get really clear on your goals. But more to the point, if you stand up tall and I have a little plastic figurine of Steve Irwin because I've been to Australia Zoo and I've got posters on it. I use him as my role model because when I wake up in the morning, I have that as my first reminder. Take on the physiology of how you want to be. And that is talking like this and standing tall and breathing deep and talking a great voice to people. Be enthusiastic because that elicits an enthusiastic response back again from them. But if I talk to people like this, because of the way we're empathetic humans, they'll talk back like this, which only grinds you further and further down the black hole. So wind yourself out of the black hole by taking on the physiology of how you want to be. And that's an easy one to do once you get into the habit of it.
Yeah, we're into that, aren't we, Richie?
We are way into that.
Totally.
There's just been a study from Harvard University explaining that too. I mean, Tony Robbins has done that for 40 years, right? And they just did Harvard University about 4 years ago where they got someone to stand up for 2 minutes, put your shoulders back, and they tested their saliva, came back that the testosterone rose to 22%. The cortisone levels dropped by 32%, and you're 33% more likely to act upon it. So they did that in a study. So I love what you're doing, mate. That's a great tool to have and one that I definitely use most of the time. So thank you.
One related. There's the test they've made people put a pen in their mouth for 15 minutes a day, which is the smile response. So when you got a pen at the back of your teeth there, you can't help but smile.
Yes.
And that is, you can't do sadness and happiness in the same neural pathway. So there's little habits like that. Walk around with a smile on your face. People need to smile back at you too.
I do that.
Those sorts of things.
They even did this ridiculous study that I think, how on earth did they come up with it? But people had to watch a comedy. Half the group had the pen between their teeth and half between their lips. And the group that had it between their teeth found the comedy way funnier than the people who had it between their lips.
Oh, so grounded.
Because it was just simply that it put their mouth into like a fake smile. Like, it wasn't even a real smile. It was just that their mouth is being held out in a smile, and they're like, oh, yeah, that comedy was hilarious.
Great. Some really good tools. And again, they did that in a study, funny enough, with smiling for 20 minutes. And 7 clinically depressed people got out of it by smiling 20 minutes a day.
Yeah.
Yeah, and related to that, what you asked, what's the salt and pepper things I sprinkled on my, the habits. And another one was when you answer the phone, make sure you answer it in a smiley voice, because people will give you the same, that's the fake it till you make it thing. Speak in that sort of voice, because people will support you in that way as well. And it's also in the way you have the conversation. If people say, well, how are you today, Steve? And when I'm depressed, I could go on about how things are really bad, or I could actually make the effort to say, well, these are the good things that happen in my day today, and talk about that instead.
Yeah.
And that takes a bit of effort when you're depressed, but that's a critically important thing, to start noticing the things that are good more than the things that are bad.
It's bloody good.
And even to the point of, I had a piece of paper on, when I went to bed, I had a piece of paper that I'd add 3 positive things about today as I went to sleep. In the end, I actually made that as a reminder above my bed, so that when I woke up in the morning, that was also what I saw. And so I started my day and I finished my day on 3 positive things.
Wow, this is fascinating stuff. So let's, seriously, respect to yourself for coming up with some tools and learnings. But obviously, there's been some other stories that have come out of your journey. Would you like to share a few others? I'm sure there's a few.
How about you take us to being near death in a hospital in Asia? That's quite dramatic.
I don't remember much about it because I was in a coma.
True.
For how long?
A few days, I think. I can look it up, but isn't it amazing how the brain, if you let it, diminishes those memories of the bad times and enhances the good times? And I think you really got to encourage that. That's a really important part of mental health as well. So I don't like to dwell on the negative too much, but I will tell you this, a bit about the story. So we'd been in this race. It was a week-long race in Malaysia, in Borneo, and the last leg was through the Mulu Caves, which is the largest cave system in the world. And there are millions and millions of bats hanging in the ceiling. And of course, we were wading through all the bat guano. I had a cut on my leg. Didn't realize these bats had leptospirosis and you could catch it. So I got infected through the cut on my leg. It was in this tiny wee town of Miri, a long way from any hospitals and things, when I actually came down sick. So it took a while to get me to the hospital. Didn't realize I thought I just had I was run down after the race, until I started getting fevers and had to get in a hot bath. And this is in a tropical country. And so finally the doctor I got on the phone to said, yeah, quick, get to hospital, and made it just in time, because the next day, if I hadn't made it to hospital, I would have died. But I had renal failure, pulmonary edema. So basically you get organs shut down. And I was on 3 life support machines for a week or so. Kidneys didn't start working for about a month. So I was on dialysis for quite a while. And the nephrologist, the kidney guys, specialist said, look, Steve, you should stop this sort of racing. It's really hard on your kidneys, and you've just had kidney failure. So a lot of dehydration and stuff. So that was really depressing to me. As I was lying there in hospital, the thought of giving up my sport, which was, as per our previous conversation, was really important to me. I had to prove that I was good enough, and I was only just getting into the headlines. I'd won 2 coast to coast at this stage. And so the thought of, I'd found the success, I'd found what made me happy, supposedly. And so the idea of giving that up sent me into really bad depression. Anyway, someone sent me a Get Well card. I actually got lots of Get Well cards because I made the news in New Zealand. And one of the Get Well cards had a piece of paper that had been printed off the internet inside it. And as I read that, lying in my hospital bed on dialysis with the nephrologist telling me to give up sport, I made this promise to myself, because of what I read on the piece of paper, that I would not give up my sport. I was going to give it another go.
Wow.
And the doctors said, well, don't. No, they argued, but they said, if you must, then give it 2 years recovery and then try again. And I was way more successful after that, after what I'd read on this piece of paper. I'd only won 2 coast to coast out of 10 years of trying. And after that, I had 7 wins in a row.
And you got back to it. Yeah, I really want to know what's on this paper.
So it was a desiderata, which you're probably familiar with. A desiderata is something that usually someone in their dying days writes as words of wisdom to pass on to the next generations that are following. And so this desiderata, and it's a very common theme. It was this lady had, she'd written something like, I've had 92 years. That's a good innings, and I'm very satisfied. However, if I lived my life again, I'd do things differently. And as I thought about it, I thought, well, actually, that's actually listed. Oh, and then she listed off the things she'd do differently. And as I was thinking about it, I was thinking, that's actually a list of regrets, isn't it? And as I lay there on my near-death bed, I said, well, if this was my deathbed, what would I have on my piece of paper in the context of what this old lady had written? And there was a long list of stuff I would still want to do. And so it was like a bucket list thing, isn't it? You see, you end up making a bucket list. And so the aim was for me is to die with no regrets on this, on this piece of paper, a blank piece of paper. But you may have spotted there is a trap in there, that it was that old Eckhart Tolle thing. I'll be happy once I've achieved all these things.
Yeah. And that my worth is still being measured by a list of achievements.
Yeah. Exactly. So now the learning for me is I had to go on that journey to get where I am now. So there's no regrets on what I've done in the past. Yeah. Okay. So that's my life, and it's led me to where I am now. So great. It's what we do from here on that matters, and how much we're prepared to learn and modify that sort of thinking as we grow older.
So bring us to last year, when I know you then got really sick again. Like this time it was fibromyalgia. So
yes. So
tell us why do you think that happened, and what's your learning this time?
Are you serious?
So that's a hard question to answer in just a few minutes. So, but I'll see if I can summarize it. I'm going to go back a step. Is that right, Mel? Mm-hmm. So I had to look back. Yes, I had fibromyalgia, and I'll just paint the picture here. It was the 40th anniversary of the Coast to Coast race, which is my sort of famous race. And I thought, right, I haven't done it for 14 years as a competitor. How about I train up again and celebrate the 40th year by getting as fit as I can and doing the race? And I got into my first couple of weeks of training, and I just couldn't do the distance, the time, because I kept having to stop for toilets and so I had all the symptoms of fibromyalgia, sore joints and fevers, and had to stop for, I had irritable bowel syndrome, all those things, the classic stuff. And so I'd fallen into, I didn't know it at first until I was reading about, what things there are, and I'd stumbled upon the switch, your course, Mel, and it just, like this light bulb went off, and I thought, righto. And as I was doing the switch with you, I was looking back on what had caused this, and why have I fallen back into another stress pattern that has caused problems in my life. And I realized that, as I look back on my lifeline, my lifespan, I thought, well, there's been a whole lot of things that have happened on the way. There's that leptospirosis we talked about, and then there was retiring from sport. That was a really, really tough time. Yeah. And then we had the Canterbury earthquakes, so I lost my house and my property in the Canterbury earthquakes, and had a humongous 3-year battle with the insurance company. It ended up in a class action. So that was 3 years of fighting and complaining. Yeah, and then we've got COVID, and that finally was the last straw that broke the camel's back as I was training for Coast to Coast. And so to answer your question, Mel, life delivers all these opportunities, i.e. stress or trauma, for us to learn from, or lose our health over. Yes. And so I vote every time, what's the learning in this, and how can I improve and grow from this? And so each time these traumatic things have happened, I do my absolute best to search out growth opportunities in it. And I'm so grateful. I'm getting a bit emotional.
It's so good.
On the switch, because it's shown me that I actually suffer from anxiety. And And I didn't realize that. It's so obvious when you look back, but the light bulb went on again. And so anxiety has caused, as you explained so well in the switch, all these bodily functions to stop working properly and build up all these toxins. And next thing you know, your body's not working properly. And then if you let that go without listening, then I'm going to end up with disease and dying. So, that's kind of a roundabout answer to your question. Is that answer?
That's fantastic.
And I've noticed, so many of my clients come to me for, chronic pain, chronic fatigue, all these things. But when they're actually there, that's when they realize, anxiety is actually my problem.
Yeah.
That's really quite common for that to come out. And they had no idea. They didn't even notice. So interesting that out of all that came up for you.
Yeah, so anxiety, that was a big link right back to my childhood story I told you of 2 years old. I was anxious as a 2-year-old because love was no longer there, Yeah.
Yes.
And then that's underlying the anxiety is the need for love, which is interesting because that came up in last week's story as well, didn't it? This driving force of needing love. And
so I've been driven by anxiety the whole way through. And that's been the root cause, I think. And so my challenge, I still haven't mastered it, and I don't know if I ever will. And this is one of the other learnings I want to pass on to other people or athletes in my position, is that we are driven. We are A-type personalities who are driven by anxiety or something that we need to prove. And when we're unsure whether we're going to be able to prove it, we get anxious about it. And that, of course, causes the adrenal response to pop up and cortisol. And next thing, we've got all these things happening. And so the major thing is here, I don't know if I can change that part of my personality. I suspect not. But the main thing is I'm aware of it and can change my reaction to it now and create a new neural pathway that is going to drop those levels and help me. The main thing is to be curious and to be aware.
Yeah.
So what then shifted for you? Because I know when you came to me, you really couldn't do any training because you needed the loo about 20 times a day and life had got pretty small. What's happened to you since then?
So as I went through the switch, I was able to train longer. And, we're talking about like some days in the weekends, I'll be doing 8 to 10 hours training to simulate the race. The coast to coast.
I can't even imagine doing that.
Oh, you
might be able to.
No, I don't think. No.
It's slow endurance training. Get that right, okay? It's not fast-paced stuff like you'll be doing, Richie. But, and during the week, we will be doing interval training. But in the weekends, I had to do those long sessions, and they were impossible before the switch. And then once I'd mastered this anxiety response, and I was able to go out and do those long hours, and it was lovely. Getting up in the Queenstown Mountains for a day of climbing Mount Aurum or whatever it was as training was actually, it was spiritual, and it was just, I'm getting goosebumps and feeling all emotional as I recall the freedom and the ability just to celebrate living a normal life again.
Nice. And how long did that take for you to go from really bad to back in the mountains 8 hours a day?
Oh, it's just a period of probably 3 weeks. It was a gradual
3 weeks.
Suddenly change. It's a gradual thing. And so it was the recovery after leptospirosis and getting back into sport. That was relatively quick, in terms of going from organ failure and stuff. It was only a matter of weeks before I was able to go out and go for a bike ride again. But I allowed 2 years to allow my kidneys and lungs and stuff to recover, to do that sort of recovery. However, that recovery was flawed. I still went back into old belief patterns of having to prove something.
Yeah. So what did you have to do during that period to fill the gap?
The 2-year period?
Yeah, the 2-year period where you couldn't do a lot.
I was doing hiking and recreational sport with my mates. A lot of it was making healthy social connections for my mental health.
Yep.
A lot of it was eating really healthy, getting good sleep. I had a rule of no alcohol, no coffee, that sort of stuff.
Yep.
On that note, I got back into coffee. I love coffee, but
so do I.
And I'm really missing it because there was another light bulb moment during the switch. Mel said, "Oh, of course, stimulants like caffeine, that causes that causes anxiety." And I thought, oh no. So
decaf is fine.
Decaf's fine. I'm on decaf this week.
But it is. I have noticed that's a really true point. Since I've stopped drinking coffee, my anxiety it has helped my anxiety levels. I notice it's a much smoother morning and thought pattern stuff. The winner is usually the one that manages the things that go wrong the best. So your race will never go to plan. It's always managing, like the God's Own race has just been, they had all sorts of horrific injuries and things go wrong, but the winners were the ones who managed things that went wrong the best.
It's a little bit like life, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great metaphor for life, of course.
Yeah.
So how do you see yourself now?
Old and wise and wrinkled, but like Yoda.
He was a very wise man.
I'm not that wise, but I would like, I still have my flaws, of course, and I still have my problems, but I'm wiser than I used to be. It's a relative thing, isn't it? And so I see myself more as I really, really get satisfaction from passing on some of what I've learned to other people. And in a coaching situation, I don't do a lot of coaching, but that which I do is very satisfying. And that's how I see myself. I still see myself as broken, as failing at a lot of stuff, and still a lot to learn. But yeah, I feel a satisfaction that I've learned a lot and don't make the same old mistakes anymore.
If you were to see failure and frame it, how would you frame it?
Nice.
There's an NLP way of looking at failure, which I totally embrace, and that all feedback is useful, and failure is just feedback, and it's the wise people in life, the people I really respect, are the people who have failure and actually give it the due respect it's due, and learn from it and do things differently. It's just there was a motocross world champion rider that says, sometimes I win, sometimes I lose, but I never fail. And so that's the sort of thing I like to look at it. I've just been through fibromyalgia. I used to do it, now I don't. And so that's a learning, it was a failure, but I've learned through, there's lots of medical people that if you Google it, there's a lot of people that say you can't ever get rid of fibromyalgia, you're stuck with it. And those are the people who haven't learned from the failure and are stuck in the old groove. And I'd like to think, failure is an opportunity to get out of the groove and find another way of doing stuff.
Yeah, it's that message is one that particularly irks me, that I was told you'll never recover. Were you told that?
No, I just disbanded by anything that was negative.
Yeah, but it's 75% of my clients have been told there is no cure. You can only learn to manage your symptoms.
Well, no hope.
And it's just terrible. It's
not good.
Absolutely soul destroying. And and it's when I present at the GP conference each year, that's one of my biggest messages is, please stop saying this. It's not even true. People are finding ways to get better.
That's right. Absolutely.
But it's terribly damaging. So that's a big motivator for me in wanting to share so many recovery stories, is to say, look, there's all these ways that people can recover. So good for you, Steve, that you beat the leptospirosis, you beat the depression, you got back into racing, you had what I would call an amazingly successful career. It's interesting to hear that for you, that still feels like a bit of a failure, whereas to me, it's like, whoa, that's incredible.
Well, that's perfectionist. That's
yes, it is absolutely perfectionist.
But in my head, it's an amazing career. And, you've also now done really well at beating the fibro and the IBS. It sounds like you're still working through the anxiety a bit to get to that real root cause that frees you even more. But that's an exciting journey to be taking that next step. So it'll be really interesting to talk to you in another year.
Absolutely. We might have to do a follow-up.
Yeah, and say, where did you go with this latest journey that you're on of really getting to that root of the anxiety and the need for love and the acceptance that I'm worthy and good enough as I am. So it's pretty remarkable.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm partway down that path, and
quite a long way down that path, I would think.
Perfectionist.
I know.
Perfectionism, you're kidding. You are never going to stop.
Well, and isn't that a good way to be? There's a little saying, it's a very funny little saying about the aim of life is not to arrive at the grave in pristine condition. You want to ride broadside. It's like, it takes the metaphor of a car. You want to ride broadside, and as you stop, the wheels fall off and the doors rust out, and you fall into the grave, collapse. Absolutely. And that's, I don't want to just, retire and then slowly die. I just want to keep on and learning stuff as you grow older,
That's phenomenal.
So things change, your capabilities change physically and perhaps mentally, but still keep learning.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for so many interesting insights. What a blast. What was your favourite insight, Richie?
Mate, I think all the battles that you've had, I think the failures that you perceived were never anywhere near what other people would even consider to be, because your level of performance and your push to strive to be the best all the time, because of that, obviously that love that you're wanting most, but just the tenacity, the spirit that you have inside you to continue to do what you do and the way that you've done it. To me, that I've got such respect for you and the way that you've conducted over your years of just pushing your body to the limit. So for that, Steve, I thank you and I appreciate what you've done, brother. It's inspired me big time.
Yeah,
Thanks
keep up
a
the
lot.
good work, inspiring people. This is a message that needs to get out, you guys. So you're doing a great thing. Thank you.
Cheers, brother.
Awesome. See ya.